we want you to magnify and amplify your natural strengths. We also want you to align who you are with what you do for all kind. I mean, we could have a whole podcast around that topic alone. But take your natural strengths and find where that's needed in the world, and you will be 1,000 times happier.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Tiffany Alexander, and you are here with us on Unveiling Journeys. I am so excited to have you today because I have a dear friend of mine named Jeff, and we met from the power of networking, the power of referrals, and we bumped into each other. We were in the same mastermind, and I thought, oh my gosh, you are doing some of the most incredible work. And naturally, when I started my podcast, he was one of the first people I thought to myself, you have to be on as one of the experts that I want people to know about you and hear your story and hear about everything that he's doing. So with that, I am so excited today to introduce you to Jeff, and he gets to tell us a little bit about himself. So welcome, Jeff, and come on over. Tell us who you are right now and what you are doing.
Hi, Tiffany. It's so great to see you. And thanks so much for the honor of being on your podcast and being one of your early guests. I appreciate the question about the background. I don't know that it's necessarily a typical story in some ways, and then it's probably very typical in others. I'm a first generation Californian. My family sort of migrated from the Midwest, which we could probably have an interesting conversation about Midwest dynamics versus West Coast dynamics. But let's just say there was a little bit of a cultural adjustment, in that transition. Professionally, actually, let me back up a little bit. I started working when I was 13 years old, doing some manual labor kinds of work. I worked in construction, I worked in janitorial services, but I really started learning about professionalism at a pretty young age and the need and the importance of work in not only in life, but also how it relates to a sense of satisfaction and a sense of gratification and a sense of, identity and then being happy at the same time. And so that was a sort of foundational for me to get the work ethic, start getting that professional foundation in place. I did some retail work where I eventually rose to a manager's level, and the organization I was working for started moving me around different parts of the state, and I became known as a bit of a recovery expert. So
what does that mean? Recovery expert?
Yeah, they would put me into stores that were failing.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Challenge accepted.
Exactly. Not only that, but I think, just from my own perspective, what was interesting about that is I didn't have any particular training. I didn't have any particular mentorship. In some ways, it would be really easy to frame this as I got lucky. I got really lucky. But when I dig a little bit deeper into things like my personality type, I think the probability of me having success in those environments, in other words, working with a lot of unknowns, working with a lot of variables, because anytime you're customer facing in the retail environment, you never know what you're going to get. And I was able to understand the business from a perspective of how do we make this work? There were certainly some operational components to it. There were some personnel components to that, but more importantly, how do we connect with our customers in a way that they want to come back and open their wallets for us? And so I did that in a couple of locations. I started in Redding, California, got moved down to Vacaville, turned that store around, and then got moved to Santa Clara, which is how we ended up in the Silicon Valley. But, all things retail, if there's one commonality in retail, it's that it's always underpaid. And so we'd moved to Santa Clara, which was a really expensive place to live. In fact, I think the base rent was something like 4 times more than what we were paying previously. And started looking around, realized that, my wife was probably going to have to work as well. And as people were coming through my store, I would say, hey, how are you? What do you do? Where do you work? And this woman came in and she said, well, I work for Apple Computer. And that's really great. My wife is kind of looking for a job, anything happening there. And she said, well, does she speak any other languages? And I said, she took French in high school for 4 years. She's like, well, I hire for bilingual and trilingual folks, and let's get her into the interview process. Gosh, within 30 days, my wife was employed, and she was making, as the receptionist, almost as much money as I was as the
How about
manager
that?
of my retail location. My operation was 7 days a week, and it was from 6 in the morning until 10 o'clock at night,
Well, that's a long
7 days a
day.
week. And, I was the manager for that operation. So I was always on call in addition to having, full 8-hour shifts, 5 days a week. And so that was shocking to me. And I thought, I've got this huge scope of responsibility. And here's my wife answering the phone. I mean, she was literally making $200 less a month than I was. And I thought, okay, yeah, something's got to change here. I had never even thought of the prospect of working for a company like Apple or any of the other big brands. It just had never occurred to me that I would even be qualified for that. So I went to the same woman who was my customer and now the person who sort of helped my wife get in. And I said, anything for me? And so she immediately got me into an interview circuit, and I was hired. This goes back a lifetime ago. Was an entry-level role, maybe slightly more than entry level. Uh, Immediately got a 30% raise of what I was making in retail.
How funny.
And that's how I sort of entered into the world of, enterprise level technology.
Mm.
I spent a little over 10 years at Apple. I had a couple of pretty distinct roles. I was a program manager for a while. In that role, I was responsible for the customer experience at retail. And so
That sounds like really on par with how I know you, and being able to have a customer experience and making that happen with identifying personalities and everything. I bet you were great at that.
we had a lot of success at it. When I took that program over, I think there were 250 people around the country that were reporting into the role. And we were doing merchandising and demo days and sales training and that kind of thing. When I left the program, I'd quadrupled the budget. We had 800 people around the country because it was so successful. And essentially, for a company like Apple, the fourth quarter, Q4 is always a big quarter for us. It's the Christmas season, and we always try to get our product announcements in before October, generally September or October, so that when people were buying Christmas presents, we were always on that list. And so strategically, it played a pretty important role in multiple years of exceeding sales quotas as a result of it. I also had the role of product manager, and product management is a very, very interesting space from my perspective, because in some ways you have to get into the mindset of being the CEO of your product.
Mm.
You have to have a vision of where you're going to take it. You have to have an understanding of where it fits in the competitive landscape. You have to have an operational and executional perspective in terms of how that product is managed through its life cycle. And once again, I didn't have any good mentors or trainers in the role, and I was sort of left to go figure it out. The product that I was given was in pretty steep revenue decline, and I was asked to figure out why and then turn that around. And, I delivered against that, and I also improved the margin of the product by 15%. And I all of that was instinctive and instinctual.
I love that there's this amazing recurring theme that you have, that let me tackle something that nobody knows what's going on, how to do it, unknown territory, throw me at it because I'm going to solve it. I'm the problem solver of this.
Yeah, it brings up one of my personal themes, which is I'm never intimidated by what I don't know.
That's great
I'm
quality.
never intimidated by what I don't know because I have the ability to know. And so there's this sort of perpetual desire to go learn. And so I'm not afraid of what I don't know. For me, that's energizing. I know for some people, it's like, oh, this is scary or whatever. But for me, it's sort of focusing and energizing, and then I'm all in. And then I get really excited about the opportunity to go and meet people and subject matter experts and hear how other people are doing it, and then sort of create my own vision and then go test that. And eventually leading to really great outcomes. Now, I definitely had some help in the successes of, internal successes in getting those products out and the successes that they had. But again, that ability to just sit back and go, I don't know what I don't know, and that's not a problem for me, I think has really served me.
Absolutely. I wish I could convince more people of that, that you don't know what you don't know. And in business, it could be hurting you. And if you're just open enough to understand that there are so many resources out there, which is started with a podcast. Like, I know so many cool people.
Right.
I want more people to know these cool people. And
Yeah.
there are resources out there, but I cannot be quiet about it anymore. So being able to share that with like the employee side of it, like, hey, your team, your people, your management, right? You don't know what you don't know, but you're willing.
Yeah.
It's great.
Well, this next segment is I think foundational in terms of where I am today and what my company focuses on. I left Apple and went to another Fortune 50 company where I was hired as the VP of sales for the technology division. Again, never had any real sales training. I never really had any formal sales experience. Obviously did selling at retail, but selling into enterprise level customers is a completely different animal. And in that role, I closed $100 million deal with AT&T Wireless. And a lot of people, I was also the youngest vice president in the organization's history. And a lot of people said, well, how did you do that? What happened there? Well, it turns out that while I was at Apple, both my wife and I received a Myers-Briggs assessment, a psychometric, the measurement of psychology. And it was life-changing for me from the perspective of I could see trends. I could kind of get a little bit of understanding about how I would approach thinking and decision making on a very, very loose, you know, and it brought it all into focus. It's like, oh, this is why you think like you do. This is why you see problems. This is why you show up in conflict the way you do, or how you respond to conflict. This is how you engage in trust. And so learning that about myself was really profoundly meaningful. But the key was learning about those same things about others.
Mm. Oh, yeah.
And then it was like, okay, I get it. And so I'm talking to pretty high level folks in organizations that, big world class brands that all have information needs that are disparate, meaning the information that they need and how they want to receive the information and what they want to focus on, ultimately leading up to what decision are they going to make. Those needs are different based on where you sit in the organization. So HR people are looking for certain comforts, if you will, in the information, certain confidences. The purchasing department wants a completely different set of information.
Yeah.
The executives who are going to sign off on $100 million commitment want a different kind of engagement. And my ability to read the need and then adapt to the need is probably one of the most important components of my success in that role. Again, I had some good people who were there helping get this done, but ultimately that ability to read people became formalized for me. It's like, oh, I understand why and how to use this knowledge and information in a way to be more effective.
Right. Like you didn't know what you kind of, it was just a feeling and a like whatever, but then to have a clear definition and almost like a guideline. I like those personality style assessments to identify areas of weakness because I want to grow constantly.
Yeah.
So if you're like, oh wow, this is really what I was struggling with, or this is what I'm excelling at, let me put myself more in that, delegate out what I'm not good at, right?
Yeah,
To
100%.
see that is really empowering to people. And I encourage everybody, if you haven't already, you can go take some of these tests for free. Some of them are paid
Yeah.
to figure out how to help you thrive in life.
Yeah. The secret, two things there. The secret is you have to put it into practice. You have to use it a little bit to really get the benefit. It's not enough to just know about it. You've got to practice it. But in the framing that you were just talking about, for me, it's about I now see the keys that I can use to unlock myself, and now in the business that I'm in with iBridge, how to unlock others so that they can actually reach their full potential, versus being held back by the, either the unknown or the known and just not knowing how to solve.
What was that transition like from you leaving Apple and the rest of your story to create iBridged?
So yeah, I left Apple. I went to another Fortune 50 organization. I was in over my head. Yeah, there's a competency gap there because I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have a sponsor. I was really trying to figure out who I was outside of Apple because I'd been there for 10 years and who I wanted to be while, carrying a pretty large load in terms of what the organization was expecting. And so I was there for about, I would say 18 or 20 months maybe, and had an opportunity to join a marketing firm out of New York. I was the SVP of the technology division. And when I joined that organization, I was taking the sales team. And I would say to my new sales team, I would say, listen, I don't want you getting out of bed in the morning for anything less than $1 million deal. And their ASP, their average sales price was around 400K. And so I was asking them to focus on more than doubling that target. And I got a lot of resistance. And the typical response was, well, Jeff, you're coming from this Fortune 50 company where you do all this, big deal making, and we don't have those kinds of deals. And I said, you do. You just can't see them. And you're intimidated by what you don't know. And so that's holding you back. Now, I'm not going to sit out here in California and lecture you on this. I'm going to hop on an airplane and we're going to go talk to customers. And that's exactly what I did. Gosh, I think I have 1 million miles on American Airlines alone. And so that was exactly what we did. We started targeting bigger names. We started focusing on bigger opportunities. And I really helped that sales organization figure out we're capable of more than we're delivering. And so there was a mental paradigm shift that had to occur there. They had self-imposed limitations, and we had to remove them and did. And, to this day, I still have folks from that team calling me up saying it was one of the most significant and profound shifts in my thinking. One, identifying that I was the one holding me back, and you showing me that there was a new way to go about it. Quadrupled year over year. We quadrupled revenues in that division for, I think, 3 years in a row. We were adding really big names to that organization: Hewlett Packard and AT&T, Epson, and DirecTV was one of our clients as well. And again, that paradigm shift. And so now I'm sort of building on this. Gosh, I have a really good model for being able to read and now influence people. And then I saw the teaming aspect, like, I've got something here. I was able to help this team perform at a level they didn't even think they were capable of.
That's amazing.
And so that was really profound for me to be like, maybe we've got something here. Well, I took a couple of other journeys. I did other corporate work. I had a couple of my own startups along the way that I co-founded with others. And, we did well in those. And then ultimately, I was in my last corporate job. That company got sold to another firm out of the country. And I just thought, I don't need or want to go back to corporate America as an insider. One of the things over those years that came up for me on a pretty regular basis is we have a lot of decisions to make that affect our customers. And a lot of those decisions always fell in our favor, right? And that's the nature of business. You've got to survive. You've got a mission. And if you don't own the business, you really have to take influence from those above you and around you and the decisions that you make, because that's just the way it works. And there was always a little bit of I sort of communicate this from the perspective of it was a little bit of a grind on my soul. I really, really want to do the right thing for the customer. And I want to do that every time.
Mm-hmm.
But in a corporate environment, that's not always possible.
Yeah.
And so when I left that last corporate job, I thought, I'm not going back. I've got to figure out what I want to do. And so I founded iBridge.
Now, we're all dying to know, what did you roll all of your geniuses into, and what is iBridged?
Yeah. Today we're a leadership development organization. So it's good to understand it in the lane, but we approach leadership holistically, meaning it's the integration of leadership in the team. It's not leadership in isolation. We have some measurement assessments that look at how the team is performing against behavioral models today. We can talk about that. But it really is about looking at a psychological assessment and understanding what is your team profile. If you go back to the example I used earlier about being able to read and influence people, leadership is exactly that.
Yeah. Yeah. Identify the strengths of your team and lean into it and encourage and grow and figure out when people don't get along, because not everybody perfectly gets along on a team, on top of many more facets of that.
Yeah. Just the psychological variables in that statement, not everybody gets along is huge. So there's a psychological component, there's a behavioral component, and then there's an operational component. And when we get alignment across all three of these, teams are unstoppable.
Wow.
Yeah.
I remember you saying one time it's like employee leadership cohesion, creating like a symbiotic relationship versus or detachment.
Yeah. So what we look at is in the assessment is the psychological map. This is a sort of a factual statement. There are no two teams anywhere in the world that are the same.
I can see that.
There are no two. Why? Because those are made up of individuals who have individual psychological profiles that ultimately make a team-based profile. Well, here's the key. If you're the leader of that group, maybe you've been successful in the past, maybe you've had some continuity in the challenges that you're faced with. That's because a lot of leaders have what I would call a generic or a one-size-fits-all leadership philosophy. This is what I've done in the past to be successful, so I'm predicting it will be successful in the future. But if you don't take into account the human variable in that, then you are likely 50-50 on whether you get it right or whether you don't, whether it works or whether it's not. And so when we go in and we do that team assessment, we now know what your team needs from you as a leader, how they need to be communicated with, how they need to be delegated to, how they need to be motivated. Just the topic of motivation, there are an infinite number of variables of what people need to be motivated. What motivates me is probably not the same things that motivate you. There may be some commonality, but if you're the leader, wouldn't you want to know?
Yeah.
If 100%. You're armed, right? I call it decoding the human factor. If you're able to know what the individuals on the team need and what the team itself needs from you as a leader, your effectiveness as a leader goes off the chart. When your effectiveness as a leader goes off the chart, your team performs at their highest and best level.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Just as my own company owner, imagining what that would be like to not just one level deep, but tens, hundreds, thousands of employees, that if you create the end result of what you're doing, imagine the benefits of not just internal, but then profit, revenue, or
everything.
All of the above. That sounds incredible for you to be able to step into companies, and you get to live that, because that's what you do is you step into companies and you're making these results happen because you're saying, hey, you know what? You're all individuals. Let's treat us all as individuals.
Yeah.
I tell people someone the other day, I was like, if you just told me, I bet you couldn't do it, I'm actually more motivated. And he was like,
right.
But that sounds crazy. And I was like, okay, great. Have a conversation and leave. And he was like, oh, I don't think you're going to work on that anyway. I bet you're not going to do it. And I was like, what? I forgot that I already told him that that's how I personally know how I'm motivated. Like, Tiff, I don't bet that you could create and invent and keep up a podcast. Like, watch me.
Yeah, right.
It's like when people tell you. So it's nice to know your own little personal motivations. What does that look like? Because it sounds like this, even though it comes naturally to you, it's still a lot of work. You've had to invent all of this up from scratch that you seem to be great at doing over and over and over again when you get thrown to the wolves.
Yeah.
What is this like for you working with these companies?
Yeah, this is a case where I didn't have to invent it. I think using the work of others has absolutely elevated what we're able to deliver to organizations. We're a partner with a company called Wiley. You may or may not be familiar with them by name. They're the oldest publisher in the country.
Oh, okay.
They go back to the 1800s. I think they publish something like, and I'm guessing at this number, something like 50% of the textbooks in higher education come from Wiley.
Whoa.
They're a $2 billion revenue-based organization. They publish the Psychometric Everything DISC. And like many of the psychometrics, predictive index, Myers-Briggs, there's a bunch of them out there. The Table Group now has one called Working Genius. They all sort of serve the same functions in that there's that psychological assessment and there's a result, and then you can use that. But what Wiley has done is they've created a learning platform. So when we go into an organization, we have the ability to assess the entire company and then put them on a platform where everybody can see everybody else. And then there's a bit of a playbook that's built into it that says, hey, if you're this style, here's how you adapt to that style or this style. Here's how you can be effective at connecting, at communicating, at collaborating. Here's some things that you should do when things get tense. And I think this is best in class and world class. It's one of the reasons why we've been so effective with our organizations, is because that is a baseline tool set that we start with.
Yeah, hand them the tools in the roadmap to start following it.
Yeah. We also, this is kind of a strategically important point. We have the ability to certify our clients internally. So the HR group or the learning and development group in these tools so that they can become self-sufficient. You're not required to work with an outside agency if you don't want to. We're here and we certainly do that. And we do individual teams, we do whole organizations, we do, leadership development offsites that are multi-day. We can do all of those things, but the organization has the ability to essentially implement at scale for a much lower cost when we certify them. So we've got that program, and that is just phenomenal. And every company I go into, especially when I'm doing some, leading from the front of the room or on stage, people always come up to me in between breaks and they're talking about how their mind has been blown, how their eyes have been opened, how they now see themselves and they see themselves in relation to others, or how they're seeing others and behaviors that they're picking up on. We've essentially given them the ability to decode that human variable. And really great things happen when we do that.
Amazing things happen. I was at an organization not that long ago where they gave us all, I don't know what variety of test it was, but you ended up into these categories. There was like 12 of them. And it influenced the decision of the company so much that there was someone in a role that was like, why do you have this person here? He would thrive here. And they talked to him, approached him and said, have you considered, would you come over here? Came over from like a paperwork position to a sales position and blew the sales guys out of the water. It was like, wow, to even identify something within someone, they have the ability to grow even bigger and you get to keep them in the company. Or I don't know, they filter themselves out kind of a thing. But if we're empowering people, that is it.
It's interesting. It's interesting that you gave that example, because the category that I put that in is something that and this is something I've made up, but I call it type to task. What's a good role for you based on your natural strengths that come with your particular personality type? As an example of that, my personality type is I'm a big picture thinker. I have a tendency to see patterns where others don't. And I have a tendency to think in terms of future state. That means that I'm not highly reactive. If I see a problem, I generally want to think about it a little bit. But then there are people who are the opposite of me, who are highly reactive. These are expert crisis managers. They see a problem, they solve a problem. Well, that's not my modality. I'm not super detail oriented. Does that mean I can't be? I absolutely can be. Do I like doing that work? No. Am I good at doing that work? There are people who are way better. I make a lot of mistakes when I have to get too detail oriented, and that comes naturally for others. So now that I know that about myself, it is insane for me to do that kind of work on a repetitive basis, because 1, I'm not the best at it. 2, I'm not getting any satisfaction or gratification from doing the work. And 3, I'm generally exhausted from having to do that kind of work because it doesn't sort of replenish the energy supply.
That makes so much sense.
So when you know about that, you can make really good decisions about where you should be and what kind of work you should be doing.
My gosh, this is all so incredible. I hope this was also enlightening for anybody who's listening. They're hesitant about getting to know themselves more, but also if they're like, oh man, I need this for my business. Tell me, when you've been doing all this and you've invented this up and now you are running such a successful company and working with still some amazing names out there, why is this all so important to you?
Yeah. When I when I started at Apple, I was very different. I came from rural America. I wasn't super sophisticated. I hadn't gone to college. I struggled with academics because I was a nonlinear thinker.
Hmm.
And our education system is very linear. And so I wrestled with those things. And so even though I'm really proud of some of the accomplishments that I've had at these organizations, it was really hard.
Hmm.
It was significantly more difficult than it needed to be because I didn't know. I didn't know. I didn't know that being different when I could frame it in the right way was a good thing. And so, that's one component. I just think that my corporate journey would have been way better if I would have had a deeper understanding of, how I work and how others work and then how to bridge that gap.
Yeah.
But my wife and I just celebrated our 41st wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I attribute some of that success to the fact that we both had those assessments early on, which allowed us to understand, oh gosh, we are very different in how we approach things. And that's not wrong. It's just different.
Yep.
And talk about taking a lot of the fight out of relationships, because it's like, I get it. I get why I don't agree with it, but I get why you're coming at it from this perspective, or you don't agree with my approach. I'm okay with that. Let me talk about what I see, the way I see it. You do the same. And then maybe together we can have some agreement or have a decision about things. And I think it has absolutely enabled us to stay together as a couple through some really, really tough and challenging times, as all marriages are. And so I'm really passionate about it from those two perspectives. Knowing what I know about myself, being able to look back retrospectively and say, well, how and why did you have those successes? Like, I get it. I get it. It makes perfect sense. But then also, the success in relationships, I want that for everyone. That's really it. I want that for everyone. And then I think the third layer to this, Tiffany, is after doing work and, working with major brands that make products that people use on a daily basis, and unlocking those teams, just like I did my sales team at the marketing company, giving them that same opportunity, the same tool set, the same sort of guidance that I wish I would have had formally back then, enables them to achieve that new desired state way faster.
Man, that's incredible.
And from my personal satisfaction and gratification perspective, it just feeds my soul.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Because some of this stuff it's not easy. And so it's like, man, why are you trying this so hard? It's because it helps so many people, so many companies. The depth of it that you're able to accomplish and change the path for someone way sooner than it changed for you is so rewarding to be able to have.
Yeah. I'd like to take you back to one. I just want to, build one little bridge here. When I was at Apple, very, very young, super professionally underdeveloped, right? But we used to walk around with t-shirts that said, changing the world one computer at a time. Changing the world one computer at a time. That really resonated with me. For me, it was about making a difference and having an impact that was meaningful. Then when I went to grad school, I went to University of San Francisco, and that slogan was changing the world from here. And I don't think that was an accident, right? I don't think that was by mistake. I am very drawn to having a meaningful impact, especially around human topics. And so the way that I think about it is I am now living my value system. And so I tell my wife all the time, I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing with the people I'm supposed to be doing it with. There's never really another thing that I'll be doing professionally.
That is so wonderful. I love hearing your entire story behind this because it means so much. It's like to get from here to here and knowing that you're changing the trajectory for all of the individuals you possibly can, one person or company at a time.
Or team at a time. Exactly right. Exactly right.
Oh man, that's awesome. Let's do this because I know we have to wrap up. Is there a nugget or like a piece of wisdom you want to leave with our audience?
Yeah, there's thousands. Yeah, I think there are maybe just a couple. The first one is when you feel intimidated or overwhelmed by something that you don't know, how you feel about it is valid and legitimate. We can't do anything about that. How you feel about it is, but work on creating a discipline, meaning an automatic movement or motion towards learning that thing.
Mm.
In my mind, when something makes me go, like that's a signal for me that I need to go gather some information and some knowledge. And I'd love for people who are, and it seems like, folks that are entering the workforce now have that, that resistance. Make a conscious effort to reduce that.
Mm.
Instead of feeling the resistance and getting into a place where you are inactive, not taking action, use that as a signal to perpetuate or propel you forward and towards the thing that you're afraid of or intimidated by. I think that's probably the number one piece of wisdom. And the reason that I want to share it is because it applies to everyone. I work with C-suite executives all the time, and some are still in that, that deer caught in the headlights look. It's like you feel the way you do, but that's the signal that you need to lean in, not away.
Mm.
So I think I would share that.
That's amazing.
The other piece of wisdom that I would say is if you haven't done the work, you've already made this recommendation. I want to echo it. If you haven't been exposed to one of these assessments, and even if you have taken one of these assessments, take the time to dig in. Now, if you feel like you've got a really good command of what your natural strengths are and what your natural blind spots are, if you already have that foundation, work on the blind spots.
That's good.
We want you to magnify and amplify your natural strengths. We also want you to align who you are with what you do for all kinds. I mean, we could have a whole podcast around that topic alone. But take your natural strengths and find where that's needed in the world, and you will be 1,000 times happier.
I love that so much. You've been amazing. I'm
No,
so
thank
grateful
you.
that you're a friend of mine and that you are top of my mind whenever someone mentions to me, oh my gosh, I could use this. Absolutely. There are people right now listening going, wait a minute, I want to reach out to Jeff. What's your favorite way that you want someone to reach out to you if they're thinking, well, I own a company or I have a team and I want to implement some of your strategies?
Yeah, you can go to the website, which is iBridged.com, and it's the letter I, the word bridge, and the letter D, iBridged.com. And there's a box there where you can literally schedule an appointment and we'll hop on a call and have a conversation. I'm on LinkedIn. You certainly can find me there. And I think there's a box there where you also can get on my calendar. And if you don't want to go through the scheduling process, you can send me a message through LinkedIn and I will absolutely get back to you.
Wonderful. I second that. If you are listening to this and we aren't connected on LinkedIn, connect with me. I'll get you with Jeff. Jeff will get you with Jeff. You just check out some of the hyperlinks that are below. That way you can have a moment with an expert who is doing world-changing things for individuals, companies, down from little companies to massive, massive, wonderful companies. Thank you again so much for coming and hanging out with us and for being here with us for this time. I will see you guys next time. And I'm so grateful that you guys stayed for the whole show. We had an amazing show with Jeff today. Thank you again. And I look forward to seeing you guys next time.